What if the greatest threat to an American aircraft carrier was never the missile itself, but the belief that one could sink it? For years, Iran built an entire military strategy around one terrifying idea that somewhere beyond the horizon, hidden along its coastline, was a weapon system capable of stopping the most powerful naval force on Earth. The image was simple: a massive American carrier moving through the Persian Gulf, a small radar signal appearing on a screen, a missile launching from the Iranian coastline, and within minutes, a symbol of American power disappearing beneath the waves. But there was a contradiction hiding beneath that image. Iran spent years telling the world it had created the perfect carrier killer. Yet when the moment came to prove it, the battle was not decided by the weapon Iran displayed. It was decided by everything Iran did not have. Because modern naval warfare is no longer only about who owns the biggest missile. It is about who can see first, who can decide faster, and who can survive when the battle. The hero of this story is not a missile. It is the aircraft carrier, not just one ship, but an entire floating military system designed around one question. Can a moving city in the ocean survive a battlefield built specifically to destroy it? To understand why this question matters, you have to understand what a carrier represents. A modern American aircraft carrier is not simply a war. It is a moving airbase, a command center, a sensor network, a symbol of political power on satellite images. It appears as a small shape moving across a huge ocean. But beneath that image exists an entire ecosystem. Destroyers scanning the horizon, aircraft flying hundreds of miles away, electronic warfare systems searching for enemy signals, radar aircraft watching the sky. Every component exists because the carrier itself is too valuable to lose. And that creates the first contradiction. The aircraft carrier looks like a giant target, but its entire design is based on making itself one of the hardest targets on Earth. For decades, Iran studied this problem because Tehran understood something important. It could never match the United States ship for ship. Iran does not have the global fleet. It does not have the same number of aircraft carriers. It does not operate a worldwide network of naval bases. So it built a different strategy, not a bigger hammer, a cheaper way to create fear. The idea was simple. If Iran could not defeat an American carrier in a traditional naval battle, it would create enough threats that the carrier could no longer operate freely. This became the foundation of Iran's anti-access strategy. Battlefield built around missiles, drones, fast attack boats, submarines, and coastal systems. The goal was not necessarily to destroy every American ship. The goal was to make every commander hesitate, because hesitation changes warfare. A missile does not always need to hit. Sometimes it only needs to force an enemy to change course. Sometimes the uncertainty itself becomes the weapon. And this is where Iran's missile arsenal became central. Over years, Iran developed multiple anti-ship systems designed to threaten naval forces operating near its coastline. Long-range cruise missiles, ballistic missiles adapted for maritime targets, fast attack boats carrying weapons, unmanned systems designed to overwhelm defenses. Individually, many of these systems were not revolutionary, but that was never the point. The strategy was based on quantity. A single missile is a problem. 100 different threats arriving at once is a completely different battlefield. Imagine a radar screen, hundreds of signals, some real, some decoys, some drones, some missiles, some small boats racing across the water. The question is no longer, can we destroy one threat? The question becomes, can we identify every threat correctly before the clock runs out? That is the foundation of swarm warfare. But here's the problem. Creating a dangerous weapon is not the same as creating a dangerous military system. A missile needs more than explosives. It needs information. It needs targeting. It needs communication. It needs someone to tell it where the target is. And the ocean creates a difficult problem. A building does not move. A military base does not suddenly change direction. An aircraft carrier does. It can move dozens of miles while a weapon is still traveling. The part most people miss is that finding a carrier is often harder than destroying one. A weapon can only hit what it can track. And tracking a carrier group means defeating layers of sensors, aircraft, satellites, and electronic defenses. The United States built those layers over decades. The carrier does not survive because it is simply armored. It survives because it rarely fights alone. Around it is a protective bubble, destroyers carrying missile defenses, aircraft providing early warning, fighters controlling the airspace, electronic warfare, aircraft disrupting enemy systems. The carrier is not a ship. It is a network, and that changes the entire equation. A missile attacking a carrier is not fighting one target. It is fighting the entire system protecting that target. This is why comparisons with other naval conflicts can be misleading. When Ukraine destroyed the Russian cruiser Moskva with anti-ship missiles, it proved something important. Modern missiles can absolutely destroy large warships, but the conditions mattered. The Moskva was a different generation of ship. It operated without the same level of integrated protection surrounding a modern American carrier strike group. The lesson was not that carriers are invincible. The lesson was that naval warfare is decided by systems. And systems are where the real competition begins. Because Iran's challenge was never simply building a missile powerful enough. The real challenge was creating the entire chain required to make that missile matter: detection, targeting, coordination, timing, survivability. Without those pieces, even a powerful weapon becomes a threat waiting for an opportunity. And then came the moment when Iran had to prove its theory. The war began. And suddenly, the world was watching the same question Iran had spent years preparing for. Could its weapons actually threaten an American carrier? Within days, Iranian officials claimed they had the answer. They announced that missiles had struck the USS Abraham Lincoln, a dramatic claim, a historic claim, a claim that, if true, would have changed naval warfare overnight, because sinking or seriously damaging an American carrier would not simply be a military victory. It would be a psychological earthquake. It would challenge decades of American naval dominance. But there was one problem. The claim entered a battlefield where information moved faster than missiles. And the first battle was not fought at sea. It was fought over reality itself. The United States' response came quickly. The carrier had not been hit. The claim was rejected. And the reason Washington could respond with confidence revealed something much deeper about modern warfare. Because the most important weapon protecting the carrier was not the fighter jet, not the missile defense system, not even the destroyers surrounding it. It was information, the ability to know what happened before the world decided what happened. And that would become the real battlefield, because the carrier survived. But the larger question remained: if a missile cannot sink the ship, can a story about the missile still change the war? Everyone thinks this battle is about whether Iran can sink an American aircraft carrier. But the real battle is about something far more complicated. It is about whether a country can create enough uncertainty to change how a superpower makes decisions. Because modern warfare is no longer measured only by what gets destroyed. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is the question itself. Could the carrier be vulnerable? Could the missile get through? Could a cheap drone force a billion-dollar warship to change course? That is where the invisible battlefield begins. On a command deck somewhere in the Gulf, the officers watching the horizon are not only calculating enemy weapons, they are calculating possibilities. A missile launch detected too late. A radar contact that cannot immediately be identified. A swarm of small boats moving faster than expected. A political leader demanding action while military planners are trying to avoid escalation. The weapon is not only the missile. The weapon is the uncertainty created around the missile. And this changes the entire equation. because Iran never needed to prove that it could destroy every American carrier. It only needed to make commanders ask, how much risk are we willing to accept? That is the foundation of asymmetric warfare. The weaker side does not defeat the stronger side by becoming stronger. It defeats the stronger side by making strength expensive. A carrier strike group represents decades of engineering, billions of dollars of investment, and thousands of highly trained personnel. Small unmanned boat may cost a tiny fraction of that. A cheap drone may take minutes to build compared with years required to build a carrier. But here is the contradiction. Cheap weapons can create expensive problems, and that is exactly why countries like Iran continue investing in them. Because the goal is not always destruction. Sometimes the goal is hesitation. A carrier that continues moving is a symbol of American power. A carrier that has to move farther away, launch aircraft differently, increase defenses, and dedicate more resources to protection is still facing pressure. The battlefield has already changed, not because the carrier was destroyed, because the carrier has to think differently. The part most people miss is that naval warfare is not only about ships, it is about networks. Look at the ocean from above. Our satellite image shows nothing but empty water, but beneath that empty space exists an invisible system satellites tracking movement. Radar watching the horizon, aircraft extending the eyes of the fleet, destroyers protecting the center electronic warfare aircraft confusing enemy sensors, cyber systems collecting information before a weapon ever launches. A modern carrier is not a single object, it is a moving ecosystem. And that creates another contradiction. The carrier is extremely powerful because it is connected. But because it is connected, the entire system becomes a target. This is why future naval conflicts may not begin with a missile hitting a ship. They may begin with an attempt to blind the ship. A damaged satellite, a jammed communication link, a false radar picture, a cyber attack that creates confusion before the first shot is fired. The first battle may happen inside the information system, long before anyone sees an explosion. The lesson here is that technology has changed the meaning of defense. Defense is no longer just armor. Defense is awareness. The side that sees first often controls the battle before the first weapon arrives. But there is another layer beneath the military one. The ocean is not only a battlefield, it is an economic system. On a computer screen in Singapore, London, or New York, traders are watching energy markets. A few words from a government official, a few ships delayed, a few insurance companies raising prices, and suddenly a regional confrontation becomes a global economic problem. Sixth Strait of Hormuz represents this reality perfectly. A narrow waterway can influence energy prices around the world. That means a missile does not need to hit a tanker to create damage. The possibility of danger can be enough. This is one of the most important transformations in modern conflict. The battlefield is no longer limited to where soldiers fight. It extends into markets, supply chains, insurance systems, political decisions, consumer prices. A country does not always need to physically close a shipping lane. It only needs to make companies believe the lane is unsafe. Risk itself becomes a weapon. And that is why every conflict near strategic waterways attracts attention far beyond the countries directly involved. But here is the deeper question. Why would Iran continue building a strategy based around threatening a force it knows is technologically superior? Because military power is not only about winning battles, it is also about survival for decades. Iran has faced a basic strategic problem. Its conventional military cannot compete directly with the United States. It cannot build dozens of aircraft carriers. It cannot match America's global network of bases. It cannot easily challenge American air superiority. So Iran built something different. A system designed around denial, missiles, drones, fast boats, coastal defenses, underground facilities. The idea is simple. If we cannot dominate the battlefield, we will make the battlefield dangerous enough that the enemy must hesitate. This strategy appears in many parts of modern warfare. A smaller military does not necessarily need to defeat an opponent. It needs to prevent the opponent from achieving its goals at an acceptable cost. That is the logic behind anti-access and area denial. The battlefield becomes a giant calculation. How much risk? How much time? How much money? How much political pressure? The weapon is not just what explodes. The weapon is what forces leaders to pause before acting. And this leads to the biggest question surrounding the future. Could Iran eventually close the gap? Because dismissing the threat completely would be a mistake. The same country that failed to prove one claim today can learn from that failure tomorrow. Military technology evolves. Weapons improve. Sensors improve. A failed strategy can become a successful strategy after enough adaptation. History is full of examples. The first versions of many weapons were ineffective. The first tanks, the first aircraft carriers, the first unmanned systems. But warfare rewards adaptation. The side that learns faster often wins. This changes how the future of naval warfare should be understood. The question is not whether one missile can sink one carrier. The question is whether a complete system can overwhelm another complete system, because future conflicts will not be decided by one weapon, they will be decided by networks. Who can see faster? Who can decide faster? Who can replace losses faster? That is the real competition. And this is where the global meaning becomes clear. The carrier is not just a ship. It represents a larger idea. American military power built around mobility, technology, and global reach. Iran's strategy represents another idea, a weaker power using geography, uncertainty, and low-cost weapons to challenge a stronger opponent. Neither side has completely solved the future battlefield. The United States has unmatched capabilities, but those capabilities become increasingly expensive to protect. Iran has developed creative asymmetric tools, but those tools still face enormous technological challenges. The future conflict between major powers may not look like the wars of the past. There may be fewer dramatic battles, fewer moments where one side clearly wins. Instead, there may be constant pressure, constant testing, constant competition below the level of full war. A drone approaches. A radar detects something unusual. A ship changes course. A market reacts. A government sends a warning. A crisis grows. Then everyone waits to see who makes the next move. That is the new battlefield. Not only destruction, decision, making under pressure. The question is no longer whether Iran can sink an American aircraft carrier. The real question is whether future wars will be decided by the strongest weapon or by the strongest system behind that weapon. Because in the next generation of conflict, a missile may not need to destroy a target to achieve its purpose. A drone may not need to hit a ship to create consequences. And a country may not need to win a battle to change the way the world fights. The future battlefield may belong to the side that can create uncertainty while controlling its own. So the question is, do you believe future naval wars will be won by bigger weapons or by smarter systems that can survive an entire networked battlefield?